but it's also possible to do things which you don't realize are threatening. And so it's also necessary to learn the language and the culture in a given area. So that's one part of the technical training that has to go on for nonviolent intervention and has to go on also for other aspects of nonviolent training. One important aspect, I'm running out of space, but maybe you can jot these down for yourself, is meeting and facilitation skills. I can't tell you how many times, it's happening less often now, which is a good thing, but how many times I have gone to a meeting where people sit around looking at one another, not knowing what to do, and what happens in that case, of course, is that the biggest egos come to the surface first, because they're the ones who are motivated to get something going here. So we're crossing a very difficult bridge from, this is a very general statement now, we're trying to transition, okay, that's not really a verb, we are trying to cross from an area where we have had almost no organization to an area where we can have appropriate organization, in a world in which most of the models of organization are not appropriate. The most effective way to organize something quickly is top-down, unilateral. And we discussed last semester how Gandhi got around this, where he was able to capture the efficiency without sacrificing the democracy, mainly by saying, okay, provisionally I'm the dictator. He said, I'm your general, do everything that I say, but the minute you don't want me here, I will leave, which is not how generals and dictators traditionally behave. So we really start groping with these new forms of organization, fully aware that there are very powerful forms of organization that would not work for us, and how to make that kind of blend. So you can buy big, thick manuals now on how to run a meeting. And these things they save you an enormous amount of time when you have to organize stuff. The Quakers, once again, have been leading the charge here way back in the colonial period. When the United States was still a colony, or a set of colonies, and Germany was not a nation yet. And they were speaking about 136 different dialects in Holland, way back then in Grauwen Vorderzeit, in the dark past. The Quakers were having meetings in New England, what is now New England, where they worked out this consensus process, which is really much more effective and much more articulate than you might think. I remember going to meetings and saying, we won't do anything until we have a consensus. End result being we did nothing. Because the old saying, 6 Jews, 7 opinions, is almost as true of non-Jewish people as it is of Jewish people. Get intelligent people together, they are definitely not going to see everything the same way. If they do, they are probably President Johnson's cabinet or something like that. They're not really using their intelligence. So you have to check that at the door. So it turns out that the consensus system was really much more articulate in a couple of very simple ways that made it much more effective. And what they did was they tried as far as possible not to go forward with any decision until they had consensus, and that kept the community together. Look at how divisive it is to have elections, especially in the present era when candidates are so similar that there tend to be like 51 to 49. You've got the country split down the middle into winners and losers. Or the process itself divides the country. So they didn't want to go forward with anything until they had consensus. So wherever possible, they would talk and talk and talk until they reached consensus. Now, in the 18th century, the early 19th century still, you could afford to do that because America was about 400 miles wide, and to get a message from one part of it to another part took a couple of weeks by walking or stagecoach or something, but that is not the way life is anymore. I remember the first time I sent an email to a student of mine who was working for the World Bank. That's a whole interesting story in itself. Very good things there. But I sent him this email and I didn't get an answer for a couple of hours. And then I got an answer saying, oh, I'm sorry it took me so long to answer. I was in Azerbaijan when you wrote. So the world is so different now. It's so speeded up. In fact, even without caffeine, here I am rattling along at 100 miles an hour. I hope it's not caffeine. We've noticed that Sri Ishran and other contemporary meditation teachers place a lot of emphasis on slowing down. And if you look at the previous eras, you don't find that emphasis. The goal of meditation has not changed, but suddenly there's this emphasis on slowing down. So why do you think that is? My guess is it's because the world is speeded up, and it's still speeding up so fast. And yet it's sick. A mind that is slow is well. A mind that is still is God. That's a very nice point. Matthias?
Your research shows that one of the main causes of cancer is stress.
Yeah.
So that might have
Yeah, and multitasking and rapidity of thought tend to go together. And I think people have discovered that multitasking is inherently stressful because the mind cannot focus on two things at once. So what you're really doing is you're hopping back and forth. And every time you hop, there's a little expression of stress hormone. So they say, this is maybe should be contained in the morning course, but they say that, but Gandhi did say that undue haste is violence. So he had an inkling of this. Undue haste is violence. The speed or multitasking actually leads to the degeneration of brain cells. Arby?
Can we find out the consensus decision making?
Yeah.
Isn't it one of the problems though that it might be too slow?
Well, this is what I was actually getting at. Thank you for pulling me back to the track I was supposed to be on. Just have you help me out in my next meditation. Yeah, so what I was saying was that was a practical solution then because things were slower. But it often does not work now. So you need to be able to come to some kind of effective decision while alienating the fewest number of people. So what they actually did was they identified 3 positions. I go along with this consensus. I like it. This is all right with me. Or I stand aside in Quaker language, which is to say, I don't particularly like this, but I'm not going to stop you. Or you say, I block this consensus. My conscience will not let me go there. And you hope that this will not happen very often. You hope that if it does, you will have enough time to work out some kind of an understanding with that person. But the commitment is not to go forward as a group as long as there is anybody blocking the consensus. A single person has veto power, if you want to put it that way. But it's not just like a vote that they cast. They press a button and the light is red instead of green. It's like, I can't go along with this yet. We need to talk further or abandon it or something. So that really, it was 150 years ago. It was a more articulate system than we think. And this is it's an example of one of the things that you'll learn in these manuals on facilitation and meetings. Then there are even more technical things like one of the earliest was how to go limp when you're arrested. What that means, I remember getting pep talks about this during the free speech movement. I know, it's here he goes again. But let's face it, this is my moment of glory. I can't just completely forget about it. But we would actually be instructed how to go limp. If they pick you up by the wrist, you don't jerk your hand away. You don't do nothing. You just let them do all. Sorry, that was New Yorkism. You just let them do with you what they will. You're not going to cooperate, but you're not going to resist. Those techniques. And now, when nonviolence has become so much more imaginative, they will teach you things like how to scale a building, how to hang a banner from the 110th story of an office building in Chicago, how to go up on the Golden Gate Bridge and spread out something to no more blood for oil, and things like that. All kinds of techniques, which, let's face it, you have to have these techniques if you're going to go in certain protest actions. You can't just get, you can't just even Sproul Hall. I'm not suggesting anything, don't get me wrong, but you can't just, stand there and say we're going to scale the building. You have to know how to do it, which I do not. But so I think we've covered the whole range. I just want to mention from meditation to how to scale the Campanile, all these things are being taught now, and how to meditate when you get up to the top of the Campanile. I want to mention one other thing that probably fits into this category, and that is how to use peace law. One of the things that I wanted to say, and it really took a certain amount of discipline on my part not to say it to Paul Chappell when he was here, because he kept saying how we're so much more democratic than we were 100 years ago, and I wanted to point out that we are a lot less democratic than we were 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, there was a recognized body, I'm speaking about the USA, there was a recognized body of peace law, and activists learned some of it and used it. So it's not the case that you can go in and hire an expensive lawyer. There's certain things you need to know. For example, it is the law that if you feel, and you have reason to feel, that your security is threatened by something which is nonetheless protected by civil law, you have the right to undertake civil disobedience against that thing. So there were people who actually appealed to this piece of legislation, this concept in legislation, when they went in and banged on very expensive pieces of military equipment with hammers, like the nose cones of rockets and things like this, and with a ordinary 16-ounce claw hammer that you can buy probably for $8 or $9. Haven't bought one for a while, but that's when I used to buy them. They were like $3 or $4. They had real slick fiberglass handles and all the rest of it. You can destroy a $10 million piece of equipment by just banging on the nose cone because they can't fly with any kind of imperfection. So people were arrested. They were charged with malicious destruction of equipment, and the penalties were very, very serious. But they argued, notice I'm using the past tense here. They argued that my security was more threatened by the existence of that object than it was protected, and so I had the right to do that. And there were cases that were dismissed, much to the frustration and disgust of the military. However, there were similar kinds of legislation that protected Dan Ellsberg when he released the Pentagon Papers. It was a little bit like what we were saying about the Israeli separation wall. Since what the government was doing was itself illegal, our obstruction of it becomes legal. And you know what happened to him? He was completely exonerated. His case was dismissed. Again, I'm using the past tense, and you know why I am, because I seriously doubt that anyone would get away with that today, with either of those things. So peace law has fallen into disuse, and law does not work when it is not used. But nonetheless, this has been, and maybe again, depending on how well we do our job, this may again become a viable mechanism for peace activists, nonviolent activists to know about. Okay, so I've mentioned that you can learn stuff from manuals. You can go and take courses from the Ruckus Society. They tend to emphasize the technical part, how to climb bridges without killing yourself and stuff like that. There are organizations that help you do media work and fundraising and so forth. Okay, so now we're in this funny position where I finished one topic and I was going to go on to another one. There's only 5 minutes left. I was going to seg from training to organization. I don't think we're in a terrific hurry. Does any of you have any comments on this or other stuff before we go ahead? I kind of suspected that this might be perhaps, this is kind of the nuts and bolts part of stuff, so this is maybe a little less inspiring than the principles of nonviolence, and it's a little less challenging than the gray areas of nonviolent ethics, but it's definitely something we need to know about. It's one of the things that's changing the picture for nonviolence in the world. Yeah? That's a really good question. And I guess the really not so good answer is I don't know. Kathy Kelly would be the one to ask. She's the most arrested person that I know of. She's slightly more arrested even than Medea Benjamin. I don't think it worked out very well for them when they were in Iraq, for example, trying to deliver humanitarian aid. I can give you one example, which is kind of a negative one. Their outfit was called Voices in the Wilderness, and they delivered, well, maybe even millions of dollars of humanitarian aid, medical and food to Iraq against the law, breaking the blockade. And whoever it is, State Department or whoever sued them came after them, and they won their case, and Voices in the Wilderness had to pay more money than they could possibly have owned in 100 years. So what they did was disband the organization and reinvent it as Voices for Creative Nonviolence. It was kind of a subterfuge, but they were able to keep on going, and they're very, very effective, still going today. But law did not protect them. Only kind of a subterfugacious mechanism to evade the law was all that protected them. Now, I don't like to be bitter and negative about this, but I think that one of the worst things that's happened to the country since the year 2000 election is that the judiciary has been swept in along with the legislative under the umbrella of the executive. So it's not working nearly as well at all. I remember there was one episode when people in a town called Jacksonville, Oregon, much smaller than Jacksonville, Mississippi, all they were doing was protesting. When President Bush was up for re-election, he came through their town. I think I told you about this. Anyway, there was a group of people standing on one side of the road saying 4 more years, 4 more years, and this other group was standing on the other side of the road saying 4 more weeks, 4 more weeks. It was 1 month to the election. And so the presidential cavalcade, or whatever it is, comes along. There's the president's vehicle with tinted, inch-thick, bulletproof glass windows, followed by unmarked vans with practically no windows at all. And evidently he got on the car and said, "Get them people out of here." I should not say that, but I'm sorry. I said, "Get those people out of here." And the vans stopped, the doors open up, fully armed riot police came pouring out of the vans, corralling these people, yelling commands at them, or yelling orders at them through bullhorns, which they could not even understand, falls on these people, start beating them, knocking a 75-year-old man to the ground, so on and so forth, and nobody even tried to bring a case, because that's where things have come to. And I remember saying this in a talk when Marianne Williamson was there, and she said, this is not okay. We have to do something about this. But what exactly to do about it is not entirely clear. But there was a feeling, even during the anti-Vietnam War protests, that although people were very angry and obstreperous, there was a limit beyond which police brutality would not go and the law would apply. And I'm afraid that you know how it's called the Miami syndrome, or Miami something, where you had the WTO protests in Seattle were very effective. I think the next similar thing that was tried in the U.S. was Miami, and there they were ready for us. So they used barbed wire, and they controlled the crowds very, very tightly so that they could not get out of hand, they couldn't do anything. And that's the style that they use now around the world. Melissa?
I just wanted to say that speaking the technical level, right
Yeah.
now, there are a few people in the class who are living in a dream here now.
Yeah.
And perhaps you want to go in the course and talk to them, trying to get some issues out to.
Okay. Yeah, that was a terrible pun. This is a high point of political activism to climb a 60-foot redwood tree, or oak tree in this case. But yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's been learned. And we saw that very dramatic film clip in the history of Earth First, where people learned from experience and worked it out through partly consensus, partly voting, that they would not do tree spiking and things like that. So learning from Julia Butterfly Hill how to live in a very tall redwood tree for two years is another technical skill. Well, technically, I'm out of time. And at some point, we'll talk about new forms of organization. Please do keep up with the reading, even though I don't have a chance to talk about it very much.